Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with. Your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
Sydney Sutherland was back at her rural Arkansas home following a week-long family vacation at a Florida beach. The following morning, she completed a workout with a personal trainer at a gym in a nearby town. Most people might prefer to rest after such an intense workout, but not Sydney. She put on her running shoes. It was early afternoon on August 19th, 2020. The 25-year-old nurse went for a run along Jackson County Road 41, a rural highway near her family home. A UPS driver spotted Sydney running along the highway that afternoon before 3 p.m. She was wearing black athletic shorts and a white tank top. 1 hour went by, then 2. By hour 3, Sydney's boyfriend had called his girlfriend's mom, telling her he had not seen or heard from Sydney since before she left for her run. Sydney's mother, Maggie, called her, but those calls went directly to voicemail. Text messages and private messages from social media apps were sent to Sydney, and they too went unanswered. Sydney's vehicle and all of her belongings, other than her iPhone, were at her home. It wasn't long before word spread across Jackson County that Sydney, who often went by the nickname Sassy, had gone missing. She was well known and well liked, so throngs of people gathered to look for her. A family member posted on Facebook, "Please help us find our Sassy." Afternoon turned to night, and there was still no sign of Sydney. It was more of the same the following day, but people were growing more frantic, and the searches were becoming bigger and more coordinated. Several police agencies were dispatched to County Road 41 outside Newport. That included local and state law enforcement, the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, the FBI, and the U.S. Marshals Service. Those search parties, aided by hundreds of volunteers, spread across the flat, open terrain across northeast Arkansas. Helicopters and ATVs were used. A Facebook group was set up. Sydney's smartphone was found about a quarter mile from her home. Authorities used the cell phone data, as well as data from Sydney's Apple Watch, to determine her last general location. Some feared the worst. It was unfathomable to everyone that somebody would want to harm someone minding their business while on a run in broad daylight. But that's exactly what it seemed like had happened. This is Jillian, and in partnership with Law and Crime, you are listening to Court Junkie, episode 183. Sydney Sutherland grew up in Tuckerman, Arkansas, and attended Tuckerman High School in Jackson County. While an adult, Sydney's home was in the area of Newport, about 45 miles southwest of Jonesboro and 100 miles northwest of Memphis, Tennessee. She was reportedly very much a mama's girl. Maggie Sutherland, Sydney's mother, said that when she attended high school football games, Sydney often chose to sit with her mom instead of her schoolmates. Sydney was Maggie's only daughter. She had 2 older brothers, and her aunts and uncles had boys. She also was one of the youngest family members of her family, so she was constantly doted on. Sydney was said to have a soft spot for children. She had 2 nieces, and she took on her aunt role with gusto. They called her Aunt Sassy. Sydney was organized and assertive. When there was a family gathering, she was the one who notified people what to bring and how much. She was a natural-born leader, and her brothers marveled at her task-making abilities. Those innate skills carried over in her professional life. After graduating from Arkansas State University Newport, Sydney entered nursing. It didn't take her long to realize what path to take in her professional life. Geriatrics was her calling, and she bonded with the patients she cared for. Maddie Staggs was one of Sydney's closest friends. She attended school with Sydney and worked alongside her at Unity Health Harris Medical Center in Newport, Arkansas. Maddie told the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette during an interview in 2020 that Sydney was a compassionate human being, and she could also be a firecracker. She genuinely cared for everybody, Maddie told the newspaper. She was always pushing people to be better. Maggie said Sydney was always urging her to take her exams to become a registered nurse. Sydney had accomplished that feat herself in early 2019, and she stayed on top of her friend to do the same. Maddie said of Sydney, "She's always had patience. I never saw her lose it. She was such a hard worker. She never sat down." LaDonna Johnston was the hospital administrator at Unity Health when Sydney worked there. Sydney made an impression on her. LaDonna told the Democrat-Gazette that Sydney was a petite little thing, but she was very spunky. The tough attitude wasn't all that LaDonna noticed. She said Sydney sported one of the most beautiful smiles she had ever seen. It was very inviting, she told the paper. When the news broke about Sydney's disappearance, photos of a smiling Sydney graced television screens across Arkansas and the Memphis metro region. Those photos were shared across social media platforms and were circulated via news aggregator websites. People all over the country would soon see that smile. But because of something very horrible. The last known image of Sydney Sutherland before she went missing was her unloading the family SUV the morning after they arrived home from Florida. It was the morning of August 19th, 2020. No one in the Sutherland household had felt like unpacking the night they got home. Everyone went to bed. The next morning, her brothers went to work, so Sydney pulled the suitcases and toys out of the SUV. A surveillance camera on her parents' property captured her reaching above her head to close the trunk. She had on a white tank top, pink running shoes, and had a backpack over her shoulder. She had returned from the gym by then. After she was done unpacking, she told her mother Maggie that she was going for a run. Maggie couldn't believe her daughter still needed an outlet for all that energy. Here is Maggie talking to Fox 16, a news station in Little Rock. It was the only sit-down media interview she ever gave.
She said, then I'm going to go running. And I was like, Sydney, don't run today. You know, we've been gone. Rest, get you some sleep.
You just left the trainer?
Yes, you left the trainer. You did an hour hard workout. Why would? She goes, it just releases me.
That interview was conducted by Mitch McCoy, a breaking news anchor for Fox 16 and KARK Channel 4 in Little Rock. After law enforcement was notified of Sydney's disappearance, agencies from across the region converged on Jackson, a county with a population of 18,000 residents. The Jonesboro Police Department and Craighead County Sheriff's Office provided extra manpower to search for Sydney, as well as forensic support. The law enforcement presence outside Newport kept getting larger by the hour on August 20th, one day after Sydney went missing. The sheriff's office also reached out to the National Child Protection Task Force, a nonprofit created to assist law enforcement agencies in human trafficking and missing persons cases. All hands were on deck during the search. Mitch McCoy was one of several television reporters across the state who covered Sydney's disappearance. He recalled the first call he received from his assignment manager about the search for a missing woman in Northeast Arkansas. The call came on a Tuesday night the day after Sydney was last seen. He got another call Wednesday, notifying him that Jackson County Sheriff David Lucas was about to hold a media conference. Mitch never assumed the worst.
I mean, at first I thought this would probably be an update from the sheriff saying that Sydney had been located. She needed, time away, whether it be from her personal life or professional life. I knew nothing about her at that point. I knew that she went on a run. These kinds of stories don't happen in Arkansas. That's why I immediately thought that this news conference was going to be, we had found her, she's safe, and she's coming home. It was the exact opposite.
Sheriff Lucas told the media that Sydney's body had been found. She had been buried in a shallow grave north of Arkansas 18, one of the major state highways through Jackson, and a short distance north of where she was last seen jogging. Prior to the news conference, all of the major roads in that area were blocked off, while crime scene investigators did their work. The body was transported to the state crime lab in Little Rock for an autopsy. Sheriff Lucas also announced that the sheriff's office had someone in custody, someone known to Sydney. The shock wasn't merely that the accused killer was so close to home, but he had been playing the part of a worried neighbor after the news broke. He took part in the search for Sydney. In fact, he had even joined a Facebook group dedicated to finding her. Before the news conference, Mitch McCoy and his photographer had noticed some activity at the sheriff's office in Newport.
So we were waiting for the sheriff, and we saw some vehicles moving in the direction of the Sally Port, which was at the sheriff's office. And the sheriff's vehicle kind of comes in, and you see a man getting out from the back seat of the patrol vehicle or the patrol truck. And it was who we now know as Quake Llewellyn. He had just been taken into the sheriff's office and was going to be booked on a capital murder charge.
The 300-pound bearded man was in handcuffs and surrounded by deputies. It was immediately clear to the two-person news crew that the sheriff's office had made an arrest in Sydney's disappearance.
I remember sitting in our satellite truck outside the sheriff's office, and my photographer and I had to go frame by frame to get that one image of Quake Llewellyn. Because at the time that he was getting out of the patrol truck, the Sally Port was closing. So we actually only had like 2 or 3 frames of video, which is less than a second, to where somebody to where we could freeze it to show the person that they had just taken into custody in Sydney Sutherland's disappearance.
Mitch and his photographer were the only media who had captured an image of the suspected killer. During the ensuing news conference, Sheriff Lucas only said that his agency had someone in custody. He didn't officially name the suspect until the following day, after more information rolled in. Quake Llewellyn, a 28-year-old local farmer who had attended school with Sydney, was a reportedly quiet man who came from a well-to-do family. The Llewellyns, like the Sutherlands, were farmers. Quake, who at the time lived in Jonesboro, was jailed on charges of capital murder, rape, and kidnapping.
I remember it being described to me, though, that this was a shock. This was a small town that everyone knew who Sydney was, and everyone knew who Quake is. And the connection that was ultimately built by state police and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office was a shock to a lot of people.
Although the killer had seemingly gone under the radar while aiding in the search for Sydney, There was one person who had been suspicious of him before his arrest and while the search was still going on. That person was Sydney's mother, Maggie. The Sutherland family found out from someone they knew that Quake Llewellyn had been one of the last people to see her jogging along County Road 41. He had told deputies that he had spotted her while driving home. On that Tuesday, the day after Sydney's disappearance, while authorities and volunteers were combing the area looking for signs of Sydney, Maggie walked up to Quake, who was leaning against a tree. Here she is telling Mitch during her interview what her interaction with Quake was like.
He just walked up and just stood by a tree.
Maggie says Quake appeared to be lurking, maybe trying to listen in near the command post.
Walked over to him and I said, Quake, can you tell me anything? What's Sydney doing? You know, did you see anything unusual? Did you meet anybody unusual? He goes, no, she was just running. I said, you don't have anything you can tell me? No, she's just running. He just kind of gave me a little hug.
He gave you a hug?
Gave me a hug.
What did that feel like in that moment?
It was something felt odd. I walked back over to the group and I was like, something's wrong.
Several of Quake's family members had also joined the search party. Mitch recalled what Maggie told him about seeing members of the Llewellyn family out searching.
Maggie was able to go into detail what Quake's involvement in the search was. And I recall her saying that you know, all of Quake's family was involved in the search. They were on side-by-sides, four-wheelers. They were heavily involved.
Police had Quake come in for more questioning. During his formal interview with detectives, Quake said he spotted Sydney going in an opposite direction along the dirt road. Investigators later revealed that Quake eventually confessed. Prior to his arrest, Quake had no felony convictions. As far as anyone knew, he had no history of violence. He was married and was by all accounts raised in a stable household. His family was respected. Newport is a small town. Sheriff Lucas told the media that he knew both the suspect and the victim. So did lead prosecutor Henry Boyce. Sheriff Lucas told the Democrat Gazette that everyone in his agency was feeling the weight of the case on their shoulders. He said, "This whole thing has had a large impact on us. A lot of people knew Sydney. This is a small community." Prosecutor Boyce told a local television station in the days after Sydney's killing that in spite of being acquaintances of both families, he promised to prosecute the case without passion or prejudice. He told the media, "It's hard to live your life in a community of this size and not know just about everybody. Although it may be impactful on the tragedy, it doesn't affect my judgment." Quake owned farmland along with his father and grandfather. The family owned nearly 6,000 acres of land across a 4-county area in northeast Arkansas. The Llewellyn family grew mostly rice and beans. Quake was known to be a private person and mostly stayed out of trouble, aside from the occasional speeding ticket. At the time of his arrest, he was helping his wife raise her children. "You can never understand why somebody does something like this," Sheriff Lucas told the Democrat Gazette days after Quake was fingered as a suspect. "We're having to deal with the depravity of man. We still have a lot of questions, and the only one who has all the answers is the Lord." An agent with the Arkansas State Police wrote in an affidavit that Sydney Sutherland's body was found after a consent search of Quake Llewellyn's phone. The data on the phone helped authorities learn where Sydney was buried. During the weeks and months following the killing, several affidavits and other court documents were made available to the public. Those documents revealed that Quake's family cooperated with authorities during the investigation. Quake's wife and mother, in particular, called detectives notifying them of a mysterious dent on the hood of Quake's truck. Investigators reviewed security video from their family's property. It showed that Quake's vehicle didn't have a dent the morning he left, but one appeared later that day when he returned home. Detectives searched Quake's home and confiscated a pair of shoes that matched the pair Quake was wearing in the footage, captured on that same security video. Police said the tread on those shoes matched the imprints that were left in the area where Sydney's body was found. After he was brought in for questioning, Quake gave authorities consent to search his GMC Sierra truck. During the search, detectives found blood in the cracks of the tailgate. Affidavits also revealed that Sydney's iPhone was found in a field along Country Road 41 South, about 1.3 miles from her home and near the area where she had last been seen jogging. A search of Quake's phone showed that he had been in a specific location less than 2.5 miles northwest of where Sydney's iPhone had been discovered. Detectives went to that location and found her body buried in a shallow grave. Quake and Sydney knew each other, but not well. Both attended Tuckerman High School, a small school with only 50 students per grade. The two were also friends on Facebook until Quake unfollowed her on the social media platform around the time of her disappearance. Quake revealed a lot about the crime during his interview with detectives. He said he rammed Sydney with his truck, drove her to an empty field, attempted to have intercourse with her on the tailgate of his truck, and then used a shovel to dig a hole and bury her there. Following his arrest, Quake was charged with an additional count of abuse of a corpse, which was added to the charges of capital murder, kidnapping, and rape. Quake was jailed in neighboring Randolph County. He was transferred there from the Jackson County Jail for safety reasons, according to the sheriff's office. National news outlets latched on to the story, reporting the story of a nurse who was raped and killed by a farmer who knew her. Whenever there was a development in the case, however slight, it was reported on and disseminated by news outlets across the country. In November 2020, 3 months after the killing, Quake's attorney, Bill James, a well-known criminal attorney in Little Rock, requested a mental health evaluation for his client. In court documents, James wrote that he had reason to believe that due to Quake's mental disease or defect, he may not have the capacity to understand the case against him, nor the ability to assist in his defense. Arkansas state law allows for such an evaluation if the defendant's fitness to stand trial is in doubt. In late December, the judge in the case granted the request. By that point, the prosecuting attorney announced that he was pursuing a death sentence. It was also announced that the autopsy revealed that Sydney had died from multiple blunt force injuries. The judge ruled in February, after the mental exam was concluded, that Quake was indeed competent to stand trial. According to documents, Quake went into more detail about his crime during the interview with the forensic psychologist who evaluated him. During that interview, Quake said he was driving in the area to check the wells and the rice fields. That's when he spotted Sydney running along a gravel road. He said he drove past her heading south and then turned around. After turning 180 degrees, he said he could no longer see Sydney. He indicated that there was a thick cloud of dust caused by the dirt and gravel that his truck's tires had kicked up while making the hard U-turn. He went on to say that Sydney probably crossed the road and was in the middle of that dust cloud when he drove through it. I felt her hit my truck, so I slowed down, he told the psychologist. In that same interview, Quake said after he accidentally struck Sydney, he stopped his truck, got out, and asked whether she was okay. He said she didn't respond, and so he assumed she was dead. At this point, I was scared and afraid that I was going to be in trouble for running her over, he told the psychologist. The psychologist interviewed Quake in the presence of attorneys. At one point during the interview, Quake told her that he had placed Sydney's body onto the bed of his truck and took her to another location, a desolate rice field. This was the most disturbing portion of the interview. Quake said after he arrived at the second location, he removed her clothing and tried messing with her a bit. When the psychologist asked him to elaborate, Quake refused to do so based on his counsel's advice. Months earlier, Quake had actually gone into more detail about the sexual battery during his conversation with investigators. After he killed Sydney and hid her body, Quake went back to work. He continued to check wells until 5 or 6 p.m. Then he went home, ate dinner, and wound down for the evening, as though nothing had happened. He told detectives that he didn't tell anyone anything about what he had done, and that he tried to just forget about it. On August 20th, 2020, the day after Sydney Sutherland was last seen, Quake Llewellyn received a phone call from his father, asking him whether he had seen her. By that time, word had spread about Sydney's disappearance. Quake told his father that he had actually seen her, but gave no other details. Quake then went to work that day like it was a normal day. A law enforcement officer, after hearing that Quake had possibly seen Sydney, called him, and Quake agreed to speak to investigators and give more details, like where he last saw Sydney, what she was doing, and what she was wearing. Eventually, cell phone data was obtained. Quake's mother and wife contacted detectives about that suspicious dent, and blood was found on the tailgate of Quake's truck. Not long after that, Quake was brought in for more questioning, where he admitted to killing her. Months later, Quake told the forensic psychologist who evaluated him that he was aware of the serious nature of his crimes, but he insisted that he hadn't killed Sydney on purpose. Everything, he said, was just a blur. The psychologist concluded that Quake was fully aware of what he did, and that there was no evidence that he was suffering from any kind of mental defect. Shortly after his arrest, Quake's wife filed for divorce. During her March 2021 interview with Mitch McCoy, Sydney's mother Maggie said she was still hoping that the state would seek and obtain a death sentence for the man charged in her daughter's death. Both she and her son Sam said they had no place in their hearts to forgive Quake Llewellyn.
The charges he's facing, is that for the death penalty?
Yes.
Do you want him to face the death penalty?
As of right now, I want to say yes.
Do you think you guys would ever come to a day where you say, I forgive him?
Absolutely not.
Mitch said that interview with Maggie and Sam was 4 months in the making. He wanted to be as cautious and respectful as possible, and he knew he had to gain the family's trust. He said he was struck by Maggie's kindness throughout the interview.
I probably took a half hour to set up, and we moved some chairs so that way we could sit down and talk. And she was just so sweet. I mean, she was just so kind-hearted. And I remember thinking before the interview that this is one of the nicest people I've ever met. But yet she's about to share one of the most difficult stories of her life. And I think that, that kind of put me into a different mindset that, I had to approach the story and the questions and the interview very carefully, because I didn't want to put her in any more pain or grief than what she was already going through.
In April 2021, the Jackson County Quorum Court voted unanimously to name the overpass on Jackson County Road 41 after Sydney Sutherland. In June, a scholarship fund was created in her name. The funds will cover the education expenses of area students pursuing careers in nursing. As for the defendant charged in her murder, Quake Llewellyn seemed ready to go to trial. He told the mental health expert who had interviewed him earlier in the year that he was looking forward to getting his story out there, to whoever needs to hear it. In August 2021, the judge in the case granted a motion by the defense to move the trial from Jackson County to Lawrence County, located about 45 minutes northeast, a short drive from both the Tennessee and Missouri borders. He stated, based on the extensive publicity and media interest this case has attracted, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to assemble a fair and impartial jury in Jackson County. The trial was scheduled for the fall, and everything seemed like it was going to go forward. But by late September 2021, one journalist caught wind of a looming plea deal.
I got a call from a source telling me that a plea deal had been negotiated. And we, as a newsroom, I talked with my assistant news director, my news director, and I kind of gave them, an update. Hey, this is what I'm hearing. We wanted to confirm with another source. I confirmed it with a second source. But I wanted to, we held back for several hours until I was able to make sure that the family had been notified of the plea deal.
Quake apparently wanted to avoid the death penalty. Arkansas is one of 27 states that carries out executions. The Democrat Gazette reported that Quake's attorneys approached the prosecution with the option of a guilty plea. Prosecutors discussed it with Sydney's family and returned to the defense, saying they were willing to make the deal. Quake would plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence. He would never leave prison alive, and the family would be spared a trial. The sentencing hearing was held in Jackson County. On October 1st, 2021, Quake appeared in court to formally enter his plea. But before he would be condemned to state prison for life, he would be required to face the family of the woman he killed. Cameras are not permitted inside Arkansas courtrooms. Oftentimes, cell phones and computers aren't allowed. In this case, the judge allowed for reporters to bring their mobile devices into court to provide real-time updates to the public. Another judge had allowed similar privileges during Quake's first court appearance following his arrest. This was something Mitch McCoy wasn't used to, but he took full advantage of the judge's leniency. Considering he had the biggest exclusive in one of the highest-profile Arkansas murder cases in years, Mitch had cultivated a big audience.
Sydney's case had built up this support around the world. Maggie had gotten cards and letters from, people all over the world. And so that was their only way of communication, or updates at least, were from people who wanted to know what was going on in the courtroom.
Mitch live tweeted the sentencing hearing and wrote a story that posted on his station's website. That story is still available online. Shortly after noon on the day of the sentencing, Sydney's family and friends arrived en masse to the Jackson County Courthouse. The group was led by Maggie. She was flanked by two friends, and they were locked in arms. The courtroom was packed, mostly with people wearing pink, Sydney's favorite color. After friends, family, media, and court officers took their seats, Quake was escorted in. He was shackled. Mitch said he couldn't believe how much Quake's appearance had changed.
He looked completely different. He was He was clean shaven. His hair had been cut significantly. And he had lost a lot of weight. He was not the same size that he was when he was first booked.
Mitch was seated in the jury box with the other news media, so he could see the expressions on the faces of mostly everyone in the courtroom. Most of the seats were occupied by Sydney's family and friends, but there were about 10 to 15 people seated on the defense side, showing their support for Quake. During a hearing of this type, the prosecutor reads aloud a written criminal complaint that details the crimes committed. It was during this part of the hearing that Mitch noticed Maggie struggling to contain her emotions.
I was looking over and Maggie was starting to get very emotional. She had a tissue in her hand. She was trying to stay quiet, or respectful, of the court. But you could tell, she was trying to fight, tears and emotions as the prosecutor was reading the details of what happened.
The judge asked Quake a series of questions, routine procedural questions that a judge asks every defendant who enters a guilty plea. Whether he understood the charges against him and the sentence hanging over him, and whether he was entering his plea under duress. Quake answered every question with a soft whisper, and at one point, the judge told him he needed to raise his voice. He looked and sounded tired and defeated. Then came the impact statements. The Sutherland family had asked representatives to read the letters they had written.
One of the statements from one of the brothers was, you're a weak soul that took Sydney from us. Another was from Sam Sutherland, who I interviewed, who I've, come to know. He had somebody read his statement as well, but Sam actually stood up and stood next to the person who was reading his statement, which I've come to learn was a way for Sam to look at Quake directly while reading it. And Sam Sutherland, as part of his statement, said that every night he's been sleepless, hoping it's been a bad dream. He went on to say that I wish, hope, and pray that God has absolutely no mercy on your soul. While all of this is being said to Quake is looking almost straight ahead in the courtroom, which would have been near the judge. So he was not making eye contact with the person who was reading the victim impact statement.
A family representative quoted another one of Sydney's brothers, who called Quake a 300-pound coward who hit Sydney with a 3,000-pound truck. He went on to say, the devil has a special place just for you, and you can't get there soon enough. Then came Maggie's impact statement. She insisted on reading it herself.
It must have been the first few words out of Maggie's mouth at the podium. And she said, Quake, look at me in the eyes when I read this. And I remember looking over to, the defendant, who, keep in mind, is shackled, wrists and ankles. And he moves in his chair to look. He does a slight nod with his head, signaling yes. And then he shifts his chair over and makes direct eye contact with Maggie Sutherland. And that eye contact does not break.
Maggie asked Quake a series of pointed questions. Did she fight you? Did she cry? Did she ask for her brothers? From the jury box, Mitch looked at Quake as he was asked those questions, expecting to see some sort of reaction. Instead, Quake sat stone-faced, just staring at Maggie.
At that point, Maggie said, the hands you hugged me with were the same hands that you killed her with. Which, of course, goes back to that hug in the middle of the search for Sydney.
Maggie went on to say, "You treated her like nothing, but she was everything to me. You didn't just kill Sydney that day. Something in me died too." By that time, many in the courtroom, including officers of the court, were in tears. Maggie was helped back to her seat by two of her friends. In the end, Quake pleaded guilty to murder and rape. His kidnapping and abuse of a corpse charges were dropped in exchange for the guilty pleas of the most serious charges. Quake did not give a statement in court. The entire hearing lasted just 20 minutes. After court was adjourned, Quake was escorted through a rear door, led outside, and brought to a patrol vehicle. Before he was driven away from the courthouse, a photojournalist with KARK asked him whether he had any regrets or last words. He ignored the question. In one of his hands, he was clutching what appeared to be a Bible. As part of the plea agreement, Quake has no opportunity to file an appeal. He is currently being incarcerated at the Varner Unit, a super maximum facility located near Pine Bluff. Headline-grabbing crimes like this one often have a bigger impact on smaller towns, like in Jackson County. For many, they can't think of Jackson County, Newport, or Tuckerman without thinking about the Sydney Sutherland case.
I don't think that this is one of those cases that will be forgotten. There are a lot of times where we cover murders and homicides that, after 2, 3, 4, 5 years, people don't really talk about it. It's not right. People should always be remembered if they're a victim to a heinous crime. But this case is different. This case is a story that will likely be talked about 30 years from now. She has an overpass named after her. There is no doubt that this case will go down in, the history of Jackson County and what happened to Sydney Sutherland.
And that's all for this episode. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this case. Let me know by joining the conversation on Instagram at CourtJunkie, by tweeting me at CourtJunkiePod, or by emailing me at podcast@courtjunkie.com. This episode was researched and written by Tony Holt. If you'd like to hear these episodes without the ads and hear additional Court Junkie bonus content, check out my Patreon options at courtjunkie.com/support. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.